Okay, so when I take a look at 6, 6 said I have the absolute value of x minus 10 is equal to negative 3. All right, I cannot assess here whether this is a no solution or I could find a solution. I know that this is a negative 3 here. All right, but I have to get my absolute value alone to see if I have a no solution or I can actually solve it. All right, so Nick, I'm going to do adding the opposite here. All right, so I'm going to add a positive 10 to both sides, right? So I have the absolute value of x is equal to 7. Well, since my 7 is positive, this is good. I can find a solution to this. So what two values of x can I use when I take the absolute value of it, I get 7. Excellent. 7 and negative 7. Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. Okay. Let us move on. So, get your notes out, please. Okay. Okay, so today is the 22nd. We are still doing, we're still in 3.6, so 3.6 continued. All right, and we're still talking about absolute value equations. We're going to keep inequalities for next week. So absolute value, I don't have a recycle. Just throw it away. Absolute value equations. All right, so let's review for something for a second. Because I need you guys to get in your heads what we're doing here. Because this is going to get a little bit more complicated. I just need you to understand what we're doing. So if I have the absolute value of x is equal to 10, then this value inside the absolute value can be 10 or a negative 10. How many of you guys agree with that? Okay. So that whatever is in here has to be 10 or has to be negative 10. So when I take the absolute value of it, I get a 10. So are you guys cool? Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I want to talk about when we have an expression in the absolute value. So I want to talk about when I have an expression in the absolute value, not just the variable. All right, so if we have something like, the absolute value of x plus 1 is equal to 5. This x plus 1 has two possibilities. For us to get whatever this math is in here, whatever this x is, whatever this math is in here, what does this addition have to be so that when I take the absolute value of it, I get a 5? So what does x plus 1 have to equal for me to be able to get a 5 after I take the absolute value? Victoria? Not what does x have to be. What does this addition have to be? What does x plus 1 have to equal? That when after I do that math, I have to have what number has to be in here. So when I take the absolute value of 5, I get 5. Or absolute value of that number, I get 5. What does this math have to equal, Jacob? I'm not asking you what x is. I'm asking you, what does x plus 1 have to equal? It has to equal 5. Or what does it have to equal? Excellent. The x plus 1 has to equal 5, or the x plus 1 has to equal negative 5. How many of you guys understand that? So that expression, whatever that math is, when I'm done doing that math, that number has to be 5 or negative 5. Because when I take the absolute value, I have to get 5. So now, solve this. So there are my possible values for x. We want to solve. So I have to set that expression that's in the absolute value equal to that positive and that negative of the answer. Does that make sense to you guys? Kind of? Nick, does that make sense to you? Yeah. Questions on that? Because we're going to do a couple of these. Jack, are you okay? Are you sure? Victoria? Do you understand me setting these two? Put your hand down. Do you understand why we set these two equations up? Okay, I need to solve for x. I need to solve this equation for x. So I just add a negative 1 to both sides. And I got 4. I need to solve this equation for x. So I'm just going to add a negative 1 to both sides. Does that make sense? Yeah. Peter. You are. You have to split it. You have to split it between the two possible options, just like we did here. Our two possible options for our x were 10 or negative 10. I had to split those two options up. Does that make sense? I'm doing exactly the same thing here. The only difference is, instead of it just being a variable, that whatever's in there equals that 10, or whatever's in there equals that negative 10, here it's the expression equals that 5 and that negative 5. And then there's math to do. All right, let's do another one. All right, so I want you to solve the absolute value of 2p plus 5 is equal to 11. Now, here's the thing. I cannot do anything. And if you noticed, it's the other thing I want you to notice. Peter, I like what you said here. So what we do here is we split the absolute value. Let me say this again. I don't like the word split on this. Hang on. I want to say this right. An absolute value is an operation. So the absolute value symbols are an operation. Stop working. The absolute value symbols are an operation. We have to actually apply them, just like we would 2 squared. That squared is an operation. I have to do 2 squared for me to be able to use it. So if I have like 2 squared plus 5, I have to do 2 squared. That's 4. And then I have to add 5. So I have to apply the absolute value. So when we do this, we apply the absolute value. You're writing this down. You apply the absolute value by splitting the expression. So we apply the absolute value, and if you notice, the absolute value symbols get dropped off. Drop off, absolute value symbols. All right, so if we go to this, I have to split this. What are my two equations that I'm going to split this up into? Colin? No. I don't change this at all. 2p plus 5, that math, after I do that math, what does it have to equal for me to get 11? Put your hand down. What does 2p plus 5 have to equal? That when I'm done with that math, when I take the absolute value, I get 11. Exactly. So 2p plus 5 is equal to 11, or 2p plus 5 is equal to a negative 11. The numbers inside the absolute value do not change. It's just we take that value on the other side and we make that expression equal to that value or it's negative. And now we solve it. So I got p is equal to 3 or p is equal to negative 8. All right, remember, I'm setting up two different equations because I split that absolute value into its two options. Here is option 1, here is option 2. When that 2p plus 5, that's the expression in the absolute value, that 2p plus 5 has to equal 11, or that 2p plus 5 has to equal negative 11. And I'm solving each of those two individually to get the solutions. Questions on that? All right, let me give you guys another one. I want to take a look and see the kind that I've given you for homework tonight to make sure. All right, who needs to see what's up there? Okay, so let's do another one. So I want you to solve. So let's do the absolute value of 7d is equal to 14. All of you solve this, please. All right, so somebody split this for me. Serena, split it for me. No, I'm not dividing anything. I can't do anything to this until I apply the absolute value and I split it. Cannot do any division right now. I need to split it first, so split it for me. No, I'm not doing the absolute value. Drop the absolute value symbols. So just split it. Excellent. Or, so 7d equals 14, or 7d equals negative 14. Don't forget, must apply absolute value before doing any math. And applying the absolute value means we drop our absolute value symbols. All right, so drop absolute value. I just wrote that on the last one, symbols. All right, so Serena, I'm going to divide each side by 7. So what are my two possible solutions, Serena? So d is equal to positive 2 or d is equal to negative 2. And you're going to show that individually. All right, let me give you guys another one. So let's do, let's do 3 times the absolute value of 2p plus 1 is equal to 3 is equal to 21. Now, let's not forget, must get absolute, don't start anything until you've written this down, must get absolute value part alone before splitting. Must get absolute value part alone before splitting. Yes, sweetheart. They are like parentheses, but they are a grouping symbol. No, you can't do the distributive property because while they are, that's a really good question. While they are grouping symbols, they are an operation. So the reason I say that, so let's make a note of that. Everybody stop. Let's make a note of that. So somewhere on here, absolute value is an operation. We must apply it before doing any other math. So what I mean by that is, so it's almost like this. So if we have 2 times 3 squared, don't I have to do 3 squared? Right? So this is going to be 2 times 9, which gives you my 18. So I do have to get rid of that absolute value. Alright? So this is not the distributive property. Because that is an operation. Because absolute value is an operation. So that's why I said you've got to get the absolute value part alone. Alright, so I've got to get rid of that multiplication by 3. So if I have 3 times the absolute value of 2p plus 1 is equal to 21, Jacob, how do I get rid of that multiplication by 3? Yes, I'm going to divide each side by 3. So I end up, those 3's divide out, so now I have the absolute value of 2p plus 1 is equal to 7. And now you split it here. So you don't want to split it until you get the absolute value completely alone. Just like last night, right? If I had 2 times the absolute value of x equals 10, I have to divide each side by 2 to get that absolute value alone. Okay. So what is this going to look like split? Peter? Excellent. Alright, so I'm just going to do my work here. Oh, those are going to run into each other. I'll do this one first. So I have 2p is equal to 6. So p is equal to 3. So that's one of them. And the other one was 2p plus 1 equals negative 7. So Peter, I ended up getting p is equal to negative 4 on the other one. So I have negative 3 or positive 3 or negative 4. Questions on this? Alright, so I'm going to give you a bunch I want you guys to practice, okay? They could be some from like last night or some from right now. Yeah. Not right now. So we'll do story problems on Monday when we hit inequalities. Okay, so I want you guys to solve. Okay, how about 2 times the absolute value of a minus 3 is equal to 5? There's my first one. Go ahead and get going. I'm going to put a couple more of them up. So go ahead and get going on that one.
So there are first three. Who needs to see number one? Okay, I'm just going to shift it down so you can see two through four. So if you're not sure, talk to someone sitting by you. Help each other out. Remember, the overall goal here is you've got to get the absolute value part completely alone. That is your goal. And then you split it. Whether you just have a variable in the parentheses or you have a variable expression in the parentheses, your goal is still the same. Get that absolute value part completely alone, and then you split it. Alright, you can't do anything to anything inside that absolute value until after you split it. Yes. Yeah. Oh gosh, no. You're secret. This can't be negative. So when I have my absolute value completely alone, that can't be negative. My answer, the possible answers for my variable can be negative. Is that when you take the absolute value of a number, it can't be negative. Oh, okay. Right, so if this said the absolute value of C3 minus 6 is F is equal to negative 9, you'd be like, that's no solution. Because whatever that is, when I take the absolute value of it, the answer to this absolute value of whatever this is can't be a negative 9. Does that make sense? Yep. That's kind of a hard thing to wrap your head around because it's like, I'm solving for C, can that be negative? Like, that's the hard part, but yeah, when you find the absolute value of a number, the answer can't be negative. So when you're done, check with someone sitting by you, see if you guys got the same answers. Talk it through if you need to. If you need some help, ask. Do Patricia's. Alright, so let's take a look at this first one. This one's got a little bit going on with it. Alright, I first need to get that 2 times the absolute value of A alone. What am I going to do? I'm going to do adding the absolute real quick. What am I going to do to start solving this? Jacob? Excellent. So I end up with the absolute value of 2 times A is equal to 8. Now what? Excellent, because I need to get that absolute value of A alone. So if the absolute value of A is equal to 4, now what? Yeah, I'm still splitting it. If you notice, I'm still splitting it. The idea is still the same. Whatever's inside of there has to equal 4 or negative 4. So A is going to equal 4 or negative 4. Or a comma. You can put a comma in there. Alright, somebody do the second one for me. Go ahead, Peter. Excellent. 6. What? Thank you. That's me, that's not you. Thank you. And that would be 5. Excellent. Okay. Negative 1. Because negative 9 plus 6 is negative 3. Right? I'm adding a 6 to a negative 9 though, aren't I? Isn't this a negative 9 plus a positive 6? So it's a negative 3, right? Because I do these things wrong. You guys see that I just made a mistake already, but that's right, right? Okay. Somebody do number 3 for me. Matthew, go ahead. I can't split. I can't split this yet. Did you split it? No, you can't split it yet. What do I... Put your hands down. I have to get the absolute value part alone first, before I can split anything. So get rid of that plus 3. What can I add to a 3 to turn into a 0? So I'm going to add a negative 3. Remember, we've got to get that absolute value term alone. I have to get that alone before I can split it. So now I have the absolute value of 3D is equal to 21. Now split it. Or what can 3D equal? Isn't it negative 21 as well? Well, not based on what I'm telling you. Your work, maybe, because I think you made a mistake. So let's go back and explain. Let's go back and look at this again. So, Matthew, I need to get... So all of you are paying attention to this, because this is part of your learning. I need to get the absolute value part alone. Do you understand that? So I need to get that absolute value of 3D by itself. Once the absolute value term is by itself, then I split it. So I'm going to add negative 3 to both sides. So I end up with the absolute value of 3D is equal to 21. Now, Matthew, I have to split it. So my two possible options are 3D is equal to a positive 21 or 3D is equal to a negative 21. Those are my two possible options. Do you understand that? So now we did that one solution, the first one, where D is equal to 7, or when I divide each side by negative 3 or positive 3, D is equal to a negative 7. So those are my two possible options. Alright, somebody do the next one for me. Blythe? Okay. So the absolute value of C plus 4 is equal to a positive 6. Now what? Excellent. Now make sure you guys are dropping off the absolute value symbols. Okay, keep going. So I got 2 and negative 10. How many of you guys got that? You guys cool? Alright, giddy up. We're all done. That wasn't so bad.